University of Louisville understands that their students come from diverse backgrounds with aspirations, drives, and needs to match. With more than 50 online programs in areas like business, education, social work, engineering, and more, UofL provides students with a multitude of career advancing options and flexible coursework. Students can complete their coursework from the comfort of their home or on the go via mobile apps. Learn more at louisville.edu/online. That's louisville.edu/online.
From the University of Louisville's Delphi Center for Teaching and Learning.
And the University of Central Florida's Center for Distributed Learning.
I'm Kelvin Thompson.
And I am Tom Cavanaugh.
And you are listening to the final 15 episodes of Topcast, the Teaching Online podcast.
Yes, they are listening to that. And I will say, as one of us always does, the final 15 scheduled episodes, because we're leaving ourselves just a slight crack in the door to come back and interrupt your lives in the future with our musings and, song renditions or whatever we feel we need to share at that moment when the time comes.
Renditions.
You never know.
Renditions.
I may feel inspired to break into verse.
I'm not averse to your verse.
You would be if you heard me sing it.
Interpretive dance.
Yeah, well, there you go. I could do that. Sure.
Yeah. I was thinking more about me. I mean, as long as we're talking about stuff that people don't want to see,
That could be, I don't know. That could be a bonus episode content, the two of us doing interpretive dance. Or not.
That'll
or
signal
not.
the end, all right?
Yeah, like at this point, what do we have to lose? Well, Kelvin, I see you sipping.
Yeah.
As I am also want to say, what's in the thermos today?
In my first use of my New York City M&M mug.
Times Square. Yeah.
Is a lovely coffee from the company Blue Bottle Coffee. Some of our listeners might recognize that name from the Blue Bottle online store advertised on other podcasts. We're not sponsor supported, but you might have heard that now and again. Blue Bottle's physical shops are in 3 countries in Asia and in the US and California and New York. And in fact, I picked up these beans in a Blue Bottle location adjacent to Bryant Park in Manhattan, not too far away from Times Square on a recent trip. And this coffee is from their, they call it studio, their experimental studio. It is a blend inspired by Japanese coffee houses, and it's called Tokyo Kisa. So I thought it's quite lovely. It's a bit of a cosmopolitan journey to get here. Very forward-thinking, very robust and inspiring, and I thought appropriate for today's topic and guest.
Wow. All right. There's a couple different ways I could go. I know that I'm assuming this is not it, but our guest has had a very, I think, complex career where she has been in a variety of places, in a variety of content, including internationally. You mentioned, what was it, Japanese, and New York. New York's a cosmopolitan place. So that's one. I'm pretty sure this is not your first trip to New York, and it's a return trip. So this is a return guest. I don't know. That's all I got.
All of that's good. No, I was thinking the varied dimensions and locations that I kind of mentioned in the backstory of the coffee, and our guest has been in a lot of different roles and travels extensively for her current role, and I thought the experimental and forward-looking and nuanced. I thought all of that. But what are you drinking, Tom?
Well, I will hold up an empty mug because I'm not going to pretend to drink coffee, but I did have coffee not that long ago in here, and it was my standard Green Mountain Half Calf.
Okay.
And there's no theme to it, but that's what I was having, and now I'm having water.
The reason I ask, of course, is no matter how slim the connection you say that is in my coffee cup, I'm going to assert that it's marginally better than the one that you've got.
Yeah, well, that would be fair. That would be fair. And today, mine is even slimmer since my coffee is just the sort of grounds at the bottom of the cup right now.
Yes. Well, shall I tell everybody what we're talking about and they can judge for themselves on the connection?
Please do.
So, Tom, you recently interviewed our colleague and returning guest, Dr. Cristi Ford. Dr. Ford is currently the Chief Learning Officer for D2L, the makers of the Bright Space LMS. And she has indeed had a robust and varied work history. For instance, Dr. Ford has worked elsewhere in the private sector, at nonprofits, and has worked in multiple roles at several higher ed institutions, including as a faculty member and as a chief academic officer. Dr. Cristi Ford holds a PhD in educational leadership from the University of Missouri-Columbia and undergraduate and graduate degrees in the field of psychology from Hampton University and the University of Baltimore, respectively. She also notably co-hosts the Teach and Learn podcast produced by D2L. And again, she is, as you said, a returning guest, having spoken about the work of the Aquila Institute back in the 90s of the episode numbers. I want to say 92 or 98. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah. It was a great initiative, and I think it's still going in an evolved form, supporting young ladies and others in Africa, Rwanda, and I think other parts of the country or the world as well. Mm-hmm. I was also very honored to be the inaugural guest on that Teach and Learn podcast when she launched it.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about the interview before we cut to it?
No, I think it stands on its own. It's always fun to talk to Cristi. She's an old friend and colleague, and I think she dropped some really interesting truth bombs and wisdom in this episode. So I would encourage you to get out a pen and paper and maybe jot a few of these nuggets down as the interview progresses.
Through the modern technological marvel that is podcast time travel, here, Tom, is your interview with Dr. Cristi Ford.
So, Cristi, thank you so much for being on Topcast.
Really glad to be here with you, Tom.
Well, we've known each other a long time.
Yes.
And I have watched your career with great fascination and admiration because you've been able to navigate a lot of changes. Yeah. You've worked at institutions, you've worked for a company outside of higher ed, you are currently working for a commercial platform provider, and you involved me briefly. You worked for a university that was kind of a startup that was serving really needy young ladies, mostly in Rwanda, which was so great. So, kind of given that background, which I'm not even doing justice to, I think you've got an interesting perch that you can kind of look back on the past 5-10 years. And I picked that horizon because Kelvin and I are getting a little nostalgic as we kind of wrap up the podcast. And
I imagine so.
Asking people to kind of say, like, all right, so what has been the biggest change, the biggest evolution, the biggest development in that time in the ed tech space, do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I appreciate you saying it's been admirable to see. It's really been a fantastic journey for me to be able to have these different lenses to look at the learning, and it's kind of like a kaleidoscope, right? So I get to look from different vantage points. And I think as I look at the last 5 or 10 years in terms of the work that we have been able to do, I think we have gotten really, really clear that student success is important. We've gotten really, really clear about what that actually means, right? And you think about the early days when student success, first of all, was not even a department or an area of emphasis in leadership, to really being, hand in glove with academic affairs. And so as I think about the work that we're doing there, it's really critical. I think the other thing that's really critical to see is how far we've come in terms of digital learning, right? In terms of, I think the pandemic took everybody else who was kind of behind the curve and brought them along. But in the last 5 or 10 years, even the work that you and I have done in parallel has been really critical about understanding how do we meet the learner where they are. And so it's been a good journey, but it's also been, a challenging discourse that we've had to have about where we come into this conversation, because you and I and most of our listeners are coming from a place of privilege. And because of that, we come from a very privileged vantage point in terms of how we think about planning and creating these opportunities and experiences. And I will say this to you. I was just in the Philippines a couple of weeks ago, and I asked the audience members at this event I was hosting, I said, what do you think about curiosity? Do you think that curiosity is a birthright? And of course, everybody in the room said, of course it is. And I said, well, what about for that young person who is taking care of ailing parents, who's working 2 jobs in Manila, who has, young children? They don't have the space and opportunity to be curious. So I think we're still struggling with how do we make sure that we're providing access and opportunity to everyone?
Yeah. Wow. That's great. I mean, there's a great book called Scarcity that talks about that, right? And I feel that for our students so many ways. So you referenced the pandemic, and it feels like over the past few years in the online learning world, there have been these moments that have defined sort of the following few years. So like if you remember going back to 2012-ish, it was the year of the MOOC. The MOOC was going to change everything, and we're not going to have universities anymore. And okay, it didn't quite work out. But then we had the pandemic a few years later, and that sort of has defined things. And so now we're 5-ish plus years past that. And I wonder, what will be the next thing? Is there something on the horizon? Is it AI? What do you think?
I think it is AI. I think that from a revolutionary perspective, as we think about large language models and the impact that they're having on AI, I was just reading a fantastic research article by Corbin, Bierman, Bowd, and Dawson from Deakin University that described AI and assessment as a wicked problem. And I love this framing because it really talks about how AI is helping us to think about the fact that a wicked problem is complex, it's shifting, it resists definitive solutions. There's no single one right answer. You, for better or worse, you have to have these trade-offs. And the article really talks about AI and assessment, but I'd like to use that frame in terms of thinking of the future of learning. And I think we have to move away from chasing these silver bullets to instead really building some of the early work that you and I did over 10 years ago, adaptable, context-sensitive approaches to learning of the future. And so I think that we are at a space now that for many of us who have not been ready to shift and move, this is the time that it is disruptive enough that we have to make a change. So, that's how I think about where the future of learning is going.
Yeah, well, I think you're using the right word, disruptive, right? Mm-hmm. Each of those developments that I referenced, the MOOC, the pandemic, and now AI, is disruptive, and it's forcing us to react and to change the way we think about what we do. In each of those cases, it did. And you are the one who introduced me to this concept of futures literacy, which I trot out all the time now, and usually give you credit.
I appreciate that.
But it's this great idea, and just for those who are not familiar with it, at a very high level, it's a way of sort of training yourself to think of future possibilities that are kind of unencumbered by existing limitations.
Right.
So it's not evolutionary, but it's revolutionary. And it's actually very hard to do because all you can base things on is what you know, your experience. But if you try to divorce yourself from that and think about, okay, what could be if we didn't have this, it takes real effort. And so you're the perfect person to sort of ask, all right, put on your futures literacy hat and look into the future of online and digital learning, 10 years from now. What do you think it's going to look like?
So before I answer that, I will actually push back against that and tell you that I was just having a conversation with Judy Landowski from Purdue Global, and we were talking about AI and how quickly it's moving, and that there is a push to not use futures literacy's approach, because if you do, you may find yourself forecasting for a future that in 6 months is completely different. So we had a really interesting conversation around even procurement, right? Like when you procure these tools and technologies, no longer can you just write a check for 3 to 5 years. It's really about what is applicable for my campus today and right now. And that may be different in 6 to 9 months. And so I want to offer that framing. But I do think that the thing that you and I know, and I share this example all the time with folks who have young teenagers, that the focus on co-creation of learning. So if you think about the phenomenon of Minecraft and why it is so successful, is we have figured out, those young folks have figured out, well, and older folks too, because we have all kinds of folks that are in the Minecraft generation, but it's the co-creation of that space. And how can we start to think about the future of online and digital learning to allow for this co-creation to happen? And I think it's going to create a paradigm shift for us in our systems thinking, because it's really a system of some deeper issues and the ways in which historically and philosophically we've thought about how knowledge is gained and acquired and transmitted. And I think we really are going to have to change that holistically, from tools and technology to pedagogical approaches. You and I both know the term pedagogy, but how often do you see it in practice, right? How often do you see that self-directed learning actually happening? And I think that is where I'm going to put my money on where we need to move for sure.
Yeah, this idea of co-creating learning is really interesting, and you can see AI enabling that in many, many ways. But you're not wrong that it feels like you blink and the systems have developed and evolved, and now we got a new version of it, and now we're doing this. And I've seen videos of agents logging into the LMS and submitting assignments, and it's terrifying, right? So like, how do we use it, for good? And I guess, how do we stay elastic enough so that we can roll with these things as they evolve and change, and be flexible and try to do something productive with them? But you can also commit too much to something, and then it quickly becomes obsolete. So you're sort of balancing these two things that are in tension with each other. How do you, especially given the position you're in where you're at a platform provider, how do you do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think for us at D2L, we're really focused on doubling down on the learning moment. So as much as we can lean into learning science, as much as we can learn into teaching and learning, my team, for instance, works on working with partners and institutions around doing efficacy and just different kinds of research studies to understand how and under what conditions, right, that we really see the greatest gain. And so when we talk about this technology, I wholeheartedly believe that it is going to be a completely different approach to how we evaluate, how do we assess learners. So, AI agentic agents aren't going away. They're here to stay. And then if you think about what institutions like UCF are doing and what other institutions are doing to make sure that your learners are prepared to leave your institution and go and work in workplaces that are now being able to double down. I read an article yesterday from Accenture, and they were talking about really taking a hard look at the skills of their employees, and employees who were not able to adapt to AI, that those were the jobs that were going to be obsolete. And so I think it's really about how do we stay nimble enough. And for us, we have determined that if we focus on the learning moment and we focus on where we think of the future of assessment, evaluation, and learning is going, co-creation, personalization, in very strategic, but in very real investment types of ways, we're going to be where we need to be in terms of hand in glove with our institutions and organizations to be able to help have that change happen. And then so I'll give just a little shout out to my own podcast, Teach and Learn. We're still babies compared to you all, but we're in season 4. But I just recorded an episode with an English professor, and she said to me, what if when we think about Bloom's taxonomy, it's actually flipped in the era of AI? What if now students are creating first before they understand? How do we think about that in terms of the ways we engage? And so I think it's continuing to have those kinds of conversations and dialogues to really determine, I just feel like the multiple choice question panel, it's dead. And we really have to figure out how to do evaluation and assessment differently.
Yeah, we had our digital learning day we do once a year on campus, and we bring a couple hundred faculty together, and they all show off all the cool stuff they're doing. And we brought in a couple of different keynote speakers, one of whom was Anissa Vega.
Yes, I know Anissa well.
Yeah,
Yes.
and she gave a really interesting keynote, as did Melissa Lobel from Instructure. And one of the themes that came up kind of between them was this idea of assessment as learning, which I thought was really interesting. Yeah. And it kind of it's like what you're talking about there. It's about like, all right, take the test and see what you know. And then, all right, let's focus in on the areas that you don't know. But the assessment process becomes part of the learning process. It's not just this summative, all right, prove what you learned kind of experience.
Yeah, I think it's not longer the destination, right? Before it's been, let us get to the goal points, let's get you to the assessment. And now it's about, okay, take the assessment. And now we have that data to extend the learning journey. And so what can we do as a result of that? How can we engage with agents? How can we engage in the learning process differently than it just being a summative opportunity?
Yeah, and it does. You referenced some of the adaptive learning stuff that we did all those years ago. We're still doing
it. It's time, Tom. It's time.
Yeah, but that's basically what that is, right? It's a continual assessment of your understanding and competency and performance. So that there are potentially no tests, quote unquote, in the course. Instead, it's just one long continuous assessment, which is kind of cool.
It is. And you remember, we were also able to understand the patterns, right, of the sprinters and the laggards and really get a better pulse on what's actually happening in that learning environment.
So as we start to wind down Topcast and look towards the future, is there anything that you want to share? Any final words of wisdom for the Topcast listener?
Before I do, I just want to thank you for just having this podcast being such a long-standing podcast and opportunity to tune in. It's been great to be able to listen to you all these years, and I'm glad to be a repeat guest. That means I did something right the first time. But I think as we start to wind down this conversation, I think it's important for us to sometimes slow down to speed up, to be really clear about what we're focusing on, how we're determining, we measure what matters, but measuring what matters now versus 5 or 10 years ago is a little different. And we really need to be clear about what that is to be able to support the learners of the future. So I'll leave you with that.
That's awesome. Cristi, thank you so much for coming back onto Topcast. We really do appreciate it.
Great to see you, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Well, Tom, that was your interview with Cristi Ford. Indeed, robust and nuanced.
Yeah, like I said, I always like talking to her. She's a lot of fun, really smart, very thoughtful about the space where we work, and it was as much fun for me as I hope it is for anybody listening to it.
No, I appreciated, as you said, lots of wisdom. I thought, your question about like what stands out, and I had not really thought about it in quite this way recently, but Cristi's observation that, not that long ago, student success as a front burner driving organizational structures in institutions, it wasn't quite so much of a thing, and definitely is now. And I think that was a good jumping off point. There was a through line in the rest of your conversation, I think, around student success.
Yeah, and certainly not to jump to the punchline, but sort of towards the end, at some point in there, how do you manage the continually evolving nature of, say, like AI, or even more broadly ed tech development? Because you can just wait because you don't want to jump in too early and have something get obsolete, or you could jump in too early and build something that will become obsolete too soon. And it's a real conundrum, especially for a platform provider. But her answer was just stay focused on the student experience, on student success. And as long as you're making decisions in the best interests of students, then you're probably going to be okay. That doesn't mean you won't have to adjust along the way and evolve, but I think that's the right answer, to stay grounded in that student experience. You and I have said it many times over the 10 years of this podcast that student success is the North Star, right?
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. I thought this isn't as tightly clipped to the clothesline as some other topics, but I thought I really appreciated the fact that she called out the typical kind of forecasting around futures thinking. And we've had this discussion here at my institution. Oh, what's your 3 to 5 year plan? And hysterical laughter really should result, if you're talking about artificial intelligence being in the mix in any way, right? It's moving much too quickly for that, and months and sprints and so forth. I really appreciated that.
Yeah, and again, not to go off on too much of a tangent or to make this a complaint about my own institution, which I love. I've been here 16 and a half years. But we have to do 5-year budget plans. 5-year budget plans, Kelvin. 5 years from now. And we get crazy instructions like, well, because we never know what we're going to get from the state or whatever. Keep your salary line flat. So no escalation for cost of living, no flat. The only escalation you can put in there is contractual vendor related escalation. So but my point being I don't know what's going to happen next year, let alone 5 years from now. That telescope gets fuzzier and fuzzier the further away you look, and it's exacerbated by AI, where the developments are just coming so fast. And how do you forecast in that kind of a context? It's a challenge.
No, absolutely, and I really appreciated you all spend a little bit of time really at the intersection of AI and teaching learning, especially assessment in the teaching learning process. I thought that was really, really good. Cristi mentioned this research article, which the one that she mentioned, I had seen. I went back and looked at it again today. Really unpacks the concept of the wicked problem. I thought it was really a good reference point.
Yeah, wicked problem is probably the right way to think about it. I've heard that term before, and it's probably how we should be thinking about some of these big issues. These issues that are not single cause, single solution. The reasons behind them are varied, and the solutions are going to need to be varied. So the fact that we've got millions of people across the country with some college and no degree, or that people are struggling to finish college, or that there's a lot of reasons for that. Some are pedagogical, some are financial, some are societal, all of the things. How do you solve it? That's a wicked problem. So try to do our part in that and help the students that we can help.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Anything else that you want to comment on about this brief but rich conversation?
Maybe just something to watch as time goes on, that this idea of AI becoming an engine or an enabler of like adaptive learning, like finally realizing potentially the promise of adaptive learning. As you know, I'm a big fan of it. We're still doing quite a bit of it. And I think that maybe its time has not yet completely come. And maybe AI is what's going to bring that about, because you can truly personalize things in a way that you really couldn't before. And AI will, I think, take that maybe to the next level. I hope that there will be some work done in that space. And I hadn't really thought of it in that way before Cristi kind of brought that up.
Yeah, it's excellent. Well, I mean, it's about time to bring this little conversation to a close. Do you want to try to put the plane on the runway, as we say?
Yes, land the plane on a bow, and
yeah,
all of the things. Our technology development and our future forecasting need to stay centered on the needs of students, even if that means our work and our products have to evolve to better serve the expanding needs of today's learners. True.
Yeah, that is right. North Star, students, and a lot of change. That's right.
Yep. Stay flexible. I think I used the word elastic, which I stole from somebody, I'm sure. But I think that's the posture we need to take as we're dealing with all of these crazy changes.
Yes. Well, thank you, Dr. Cristi Ford, for joining us. Thank you, Tom, for a good wraparound conversation. And until next time for Topcast, I'm Kelvin.
And I'm Tom.
See ya.
I can tell you're a podcaster.